My name is Grace Reed, and I am 32 years old. One morning, the day my grandfather's last wishes were going to be read, something happened that changed everything. I was sitting in my car when a homeless man knocked on my window and said four simple words that saved my life. "Don't take that car." I didn't scream or run. I looked at him, then looked down at the ground beneath my front wheels where dark liquid was pooling on the black road. It was brake fluid, like a dark secret that had finally surfaced. Someone had crawled under my car while I slept and cut the line with precision. But that isn't what keeps me awake at night. What stays with me is what happened 2 days later, when I walked into the room where the will was being read, completely unharmed, and my own mother fell to her knees, not from relief, but from terror, because she was the one who had ordered someone to kill me, that I grew up in Knoxville, Tennessee. Though I wasn't born there, I was placed there. My real parents died in a house fire when I was 6 years old. I don't remember much of the fire itself. What I remember is the smell of smoke that stayed in my hair for days afterward, and a kind woman from the government handing me a large trash bag to put all my clothes in. A year later, a family called the Calloways took me in. Victor and Brenda Calloway had a 4-year-old son named Derek. They signed the legal papers, gave me a small bedroom at the back of their house, and told everyone at their church that they had saved a child. That was the only time anything in that house felt even remotely warm. But there was Walter. Walter Calloway was Victor's father, and he was different from the rest of them. He lived to be 84 years old, and was the only person in that entire family who ever looked at me like I actually belonged. For 4 decades, he ran an auto repair shop on the east side of Knoxville, building it from almost nothing, one hydraulic lift, and a rented space, into something real and lasting. He taught me how to change the oil in a car before I even knew how to ride a bicycle, and as I grew older, he gave me something far more valuable. He told me, "Gracie, people show you who they really are. You need to believe them when they do." The first time I truly listened to that, I changed my life. I taught myself cybersecurity through scholarships and online courses, moved into my own apartment at 22, and built everything I had without asking the Calloways for a single thing. When Walter's health began to decline about 3 years ago, I was the one who showed up. I set up his laptop, organized his online bill payments, and made sure he got to every doctor's appointment. He signed a legal document making me his financial and healthcare decision-maker. A week before he passed, he pressed his silver pocket watch into my hand, an old wind-up watch, older than me, and said, "Keep it wound, Gracie. It only stops when you forget." He died 17 days before the will reading, and I have wound that watch every single morning since. The Calloways were the kind of family that looked respectable from a distance. Victor was 58 and ran Calloway Motors, a used car dealership that had been bleeding money since I was in high school. He wore neat shirts and talked confidently about turning things around, but he never did. Brenda was 56, the type of woman who volunteered at church bake sales and kept her kitchen spotless, but who never once asked me how I was feeling. She made a family Christmas card every year. I was never in it. Derek was 29, still living at home, drifting from one failed venture to the next. A sports bar that lasted 4 months, car flipping that lost money every time, online sales where he collected payment and never shipped the goods. He wasn't cruel the way Brenda was. He was just hollow, doing whatever his mother told him. Without question, I kept my distance from all of them. My life and theirs ran parallel, never touching, until Walter died. At his funeral, 2 weeks before the will reading, I stood alone by the casket while Victor, Brenda, and Derek sat together in the front row. Afterward, Brenda found me alone in the hallway. She moved close enough that I could smell her perfume and whispered that I was not family, that I never had been, and that I shouldn't expect anything from the will. I said nothing. I walked to my car, sat there feeling Walter's watch against my chest, and drove home without letting myself cry. The night before the will reading, I was at my kitchen table with my laptop open and my coffee going cold. I was reviewing Walter's accounts, not for the will itself, but because I had promised him I would close everything properly. That was when I saw the pattern again, one I had first noticed 6 weeks earlier, while Walter was still alive. Every 2 weeks on a Tuesday, money left his main account. Sometimes a few $1,000s, sometimes $5,000. It always went to the same place, an account belonging to someone called B. Prescott. When I dug into it, I found that account had been opened at a separate bank roughly 18 months after Brenda was given access to help Walter with his bills. I counted every transfer. There were 78 of them over 3 years. The total came to $247,000. I had known about this for weeks. I could have confronted Brenda while Walter was still alive. I could have called the police, but Walter was fading, and the thought of him spending his last days watching his family tear itself apart over money made me feel sick. So I waited. I photographed every single transaction, logged the dates, and saved everything securely. In my line of work, you collect proof before you act. I closed my laptop at midnight, knowing I had to be at the lawyer's office by 10 the next morning. I didn't yet know that the stolen money was only the beginning. At 7:30 the next morning, I walked to my car in the parking lot. A man stepped out from behind a dumpster. He was wearing a worn army jacket and had a thin face, but his eyes were calm and steady. He knew my name. He said he was Frank Dolan, 67 years old, and that he had worked at Walter's shop for 22 years, first as head mechanic, then as manager, until the shop closed. After that, his wife had fallen ill, and the medical costs wiped out everything he had. When Brenda took over Walter's finances, the monthly checks Walter used to send Frank simply stopped. For the past 4 months, Frank had been sleeping in his car behind my apartment building. Walter had asked him, before he died, to keep an eye on me. Frank told me that at 2 a.m, a black truck had pulled into the parking lot. A man got under my car with a flashlight and a tool and worked there for 30 minutes. Frank recognized the truck. It belonged to Derek. I crouched down and looked. The puddle was already there, smelling sharply of chemicals. The brake line had been cut cleanly, not worn through, not damaged, but sliced deliberately. I touched the wet ground, stood up, and said, "Thank you." Frank nodded and said Walter had asked him to do it, and that was enough for him. I didn't call the police. I called Nolan Webb, a private investigator I had worked with before on a case involving corporate theft. He was methodical, discreet, and knew how to preserve evidence properly. I explained everything, the cut lines, Derek's truck, the will reading. I knew that if I called the police immediately, they would investigate the car, and Brenda would deny all knowledge, while $247,000 in stolen funds quietly disappeared. I needed everything to come out at once. I told Nolan I needed 48 hours. I wanted the Calloways to believe I was already dead. Nolan and I moved quickly. He photographed the damage and collected a sample of the fluid. Then he drove my car to a ditch on the route I normally took to the lawyer's office, left the door open with no one inside, and made it look like a crash. By 9 o'clock, local radio was reporting an accident on Route 12 with a missing driver. I listened to it from a small hotel across town. Nolan watched the Calloway house. When the news broke, not one of them called for help, drove to the crash site, or contacted a hospital to ask if I was alive. Brenda stood in her kitchen, made one phone call, and sat down looking composed. Victor put his head in his hands and didn't move. Derek went to the garage, placed something in a black trash bag, and drove off to dispose of it. Because Walter's phone account was still in his name and I had his login credentials, I was able to access the family's message records. At 11:47 that morning, Derek texted Brenda 2 words, "It's handled." She replied, Thank God. Now get to the lawyers. My adopted brother had told our mother I was dead the way someone texts about finishing an errand. I saved every message that I stayed in that hotel room for 2 days. On one half of my screen were the bank records. On the other were Nolan's photographs. I had lived with these people for 25 years. For 25 years, I was the girl in the back bedroom who was never allowed in the family photos. And now they had cut my break line on the morning I was meant to inherit. They hadn't cared whether I was breathing, that I decided I wasn't going to be grief-stricken. I was going to be prepared. I built a folder on my computer labeled Callaway, bank records, photographs, evidence of the sabotage, and the text messages, all organized by date and time. Then I called Walter's lawyer, Margaret Holt. She had heard about the crash and was frightened. I told her I was safe, but that we needed to be careful. She told me something I hadn't known. 2 months before Walter died, he had come to her office and told her he had made a mistake trusting certain people. He had changed his will to name me as executor rather than Victor. He had also left a sealed letter, one that could only be opened if I was physically present at the reading. If I didn't show up, it would be locked away permanently. I asked Margaret to schedule the meeting for 2 days out. During the remaining time in the hotel, I kept digging. I traced where the $247,000 had gone. The largest portion had been used to keep Victor's car dealership from collapsing. A significant amount had cleared Derek's credit card debt and covered losses from his failed businesses. And $60,000 had been used by Brenda to purchase a vacation cabin in the mountains just for herself. The cruelest detail was this: Brenda stole money she would have received legitimately once Walter died. She couldn't wait. Nolan brought me additional evidence. Security footage placed Derek's truck in my parking lot in the early hours of that morning. A receipt from AutoZone, 2 days before the sabotage, showed Derek purchasing a line-cutting tool and replacement tubing. He had paid with his own credit card. I also received, through my mail, a letter Walter had sent before he died. It contained a bank document from Valentine's Day and a handwritten note. I didn't sign this. Check the others. The signature on that document was close to Walter's, but slightly wrong. It was forged. Another document showed Victor had borrowed money using Walter's house as collateral, also with a forged signature. Victor hadn't just stood by while Brenda stole. He had falsified his own father's name to prop up his failing business. I contacted Detective Clara Sims, someone I had worked with professionally before. I laid out everything. She told me I had more than enough for charges of elder financial abuse and attempted murder, but I asked her to wait. I wanted all 3 of them in the same room when it happened. She agreed to stay outside the building until I signaled her. The morning of the will reading, I dressed carefully in a dark suit. I put Walter's watch in my breast pocket, right over my heart. Frank Dolan came with us, wearing one of Walter's old jackets. We drove downtown to Margaret's office. Brenda's SUV was already parked outside, along with Derek's truck and Victor's car, the latter parked crookedly. Like whoever left it, there had been shaking. I walked up the stairs and opened the door to the meeting room. Brenda's phone slipped out of her hand. Her face went white. Victor knocked over his coffee. Derek sat with his mouth open. They stared at me the way people stare at something that should not exist. I sat down, told Margaret to begin, and not one of them asked whether I had been in an accident or whether I was all right. They were too frightened to speak. Margaret read through the estate. Walter's assets totaled approximately $555,000. He had left it to be divided equally among Victor, Derek, and me, with each receiving roughly $185,000. I watched Brenda and Derek visibly relax. They thought they had gotten away with everything. They had tried to kill me over money they were already going to receive. Then Margaret opened the sealed letter. In it, Walter wrote that he had known money was disappearing. He said he had been wrong about 3 people in his family and right about one. He had named me executor because he trusted me to do what was right. I opened my folder. I told Brenda I knew about the $247,000. I knew about the mountain cabin. I showed the bank records, clearly organized, date by date. She began yelling that I wasn't real family, that I was a stray who had wandered into their lives. Then I placed the photographs of the brake lines on the table. I laid down the AutoZone receipt with Derek's name on it, and the security footage still from Nolan's camera. Derek began to cry. He pointed at his mother and said, "You said there were no cameras." Brenda snapped back, "I told you to use cash." With those 6 words, she confirmed that she had directed him. Victor sat very still, looking as though something inside him had finally given out. He admitted he had known about the money, though he claimed to have known nothing about the car. I told him it didn't matter because he had signed his father's name on documents that were not his to sign. That I sent a text to Detective Clara. Seconds later, officers entered the room. Derek was arrested for the attempted murder. Brenda was arrested as a co-conspirator and for the financial theft. As they let her out, she told me I would be alone. I told her I had been alone from the day she whispered to me at Walter's funeral that I didn't belong. I was Walter's family. That had always been enough. Victor was not arrested that day, but he was required to surrender his assets and his business to repay the stolen funds. The dealership was closed. The mountain cabin was sold. Walter's house passed to me through the estate. Frank Dolan now has a job and a small apartment above the garage, and he tells me he is happier than he has been in years. I opened a cybersecurity consultancy out of Walter's old shop. Every morning I sit at his table, and I wind the silver watch exactly 40 times. Walter used to say that machines are honest, but people hide the parts of themselves that are broken. He knew what his family was doing to him, but he was too sick to fight them. He trusted me to do it for him, and I did. Family is not about whose name appears on a legal document. It is about who actually shows up. It is the man who sleeps in his car for 4 months to keep a promise to someone who is already gone. It is the lawyer who holds a letter until the right person walks through the door. It is the old man who teaches a lost girl how to take care of something small and keep it running. The people who love you help you grow. The people who don't will try to make sure you never get the chance. The difference, in the end, is quite simple to see. If you believe them when they show you,